Thank you, Johanna. And I can really much agree what Johanna said about the importance of the cooperation here in Finland and the good cooperation that we have with the NGOs and the foundations with the ministry. And thanks to that. And I think it's also very important for us when we have this good opportunity for cooperation here in Finland to use this for full potential and to help the other countries also to move forward to the same direction together. And I hope that this discussion today will help us also to find more ways how to work on to protect also the environmental defenders. But next I would like to ask Dorothée Cambou to give a keynote speech, global human right to the healthy and sustainable environment and legal consecration to ecological and just transformations. Dorothée Cambou is an assistant professor of sustainability science at the Faculty of Law at the University of Helsinki. Her research focus lies in international law and human rights, and her expertise is especially in the field of indigenous people's rights, land and resource governance. She is active in several Nordic and Arctic research networks, and she has been also an expert member of the research project on the status of human rights performance of Finnish companies, commissioned by the Finnish Prime Minister's Office. And she is also a member in Siemapu Foundation Voluntary Working Group, so she has very good overview of the issues. Thank you, and floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I have to say it's a pleasure to be here, especially to speak about such an important topic as the human right to safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment. As I begin this presentation, I want to emphasize again that last year, on October 8th, the Human Rights Council recognized for the first time that having a clean, healthy and sustainable environment is a human right. The 2021 resolution was supported by 1,300 NGO groups, including indigenous people, as well as 15 UN agencies and business groups, and was adopted by 43 states. The adoption of the UN resolution represents a real achievement in international law because it reflects a growing universal recognition of the links between human rights and the protection of the environment. It is now indeed increasingly established that the protection of the environment is a condition sine qua non for protecting human rights. Yet, despite this legal development, the fact remains that the degradation of the environment has continued to deteriorate at a phenomenal speed with the arrival of the Anthropocene. To address this issue, it is therefore asserted that the international community should take action and recognize an international right to a healthy environment. Although this right is increasingly recognized at the regional and national level, the puzzling fact remains indeed that the right to a healthy environment is still not formally recognized at the international level. There is simply no international legal binding instrument that recognizes this right. Consequently, the Human Rights Council concluded in its resolution adopted last year by inviting the UN General Assembly to consider the recognition of such a right at the international level. Like many others, I do believe that recognizing the right to a healthy environment at the international level must be promoted. In this regard, the purpose of my presentation today is to explain what is the added value of such a right. First, and in line with the content of this seminar, I will underline the added value of such a right as a catalyst for change to address the deficit of the global environmental governance. From this standpoint, my goal is to underline the instrumental value of the right for environmental defenders in their battle to protect the environment. Second, I also want to underline the importance of recognizing the human right to a healthy environment to achieve ecological and just transformation. In this regard, my attention is particularly focused on the importance of recognizing such a right to tackle the legacy of colonialism, discrimination and inequality, which still affect millions of people around the world, but most importantly, indigenous people. In this regard, my general argument is that recognizing an international human right to a healthy environment is a means to bridge ecological protection with social, environmental, and climate justice. So, to understand the added value of the right to a healthy environment, it is first important to look back at the progress we have achieved so far, but also shortcomings. For more than 40 years, the international community proclaimed its goal of defending and improving the human rights environment for present and future generations. During these 4 decades, there have been explosion of environmental regulation all around the world at the national and international level. In addition, the number and scope of international and domestic law, judicial decisions, and academic studies regarding the link between human rights and the environment have also grown rapidly. As evidenced by this world map, over 100 national constitutions already recognize the right to a healthy environment. Yet, as this map also demonstrates, not all states have recognized the right to a healthy environment, and more problematically, some of the most powerful economies and emitters of CO2, namely the USA and China, still oppose the recognition of such a right. In this regard, the international recognition of the right to a healthy environment is important because it could increase efforts for the formal recognition of the right by those states that do not yet explicitly recognize the right in their domestic legal order. In addition, such a recognition would also help to clarify and strengthen the recognition of the right at the national and regional level. As we see, despite an overwhelming recognition of the right to a healthy environment, many states around the world still fail to protect the environment in a sufficient manner. And there is often, in fact, shortcoming in the legal framework or its implementation. It is therefore argued that providing recognition for a right to a healthy environment would help to strengthen the content and implementation of constitutional provision, legislation, and policy at the national and regional level. It will also help to improve the governance framework for environmental protection at the global level. This said, let me also explain that the recognition of the right to a healthy environment is not panacea for solving the environmental crisis. However, it is an instrument of change that can facilitate and improve the work of environmental defenders. First, the right to a healthy environment can provide additional safety for environmental defenders. Providing safety for environmental defenders in the light of the opening remark cannot be overstated, especially when we know that the majority of human rights activists killed last year were defenders working for improving the protection of land and nature. With the recognition of the right to a healthy environment, there is an opportunity to create mechanisms that will be better to protect environmental defenders in their work, so they can challenge state and corporate actors without risking their security or endangering their life. Beyond the question of safety, the recognition of a human right to a healthy environment provides an additional tool to challenge states and corporate actors for failing to take action to protect the environment. Recognizing such a right often implies guaranteeing or improving procedural rights, such as a right to receive information, to participate in decision-making about environmental matters, and to obtain access to the justice system. In addition, the right has substantive components, which are linked with the obligation of state and private actors to protect the environment. In this regard, the human right to a healthy environment does not only protect environmental defenders, but also provide a tool to empower them procedurally and substantively to challenge state and non-state actors to protect, respect, and fulfill these rights. In fact, court battles invoking the right to a healthy environment are already frequent and have steered the development of an increasing body of decision which rely on human rights to protect the environment, both at the regional and national levels. At the regional level, the indigenous people of Laka have successfully petitioned the Inter-American Court in 2020 for protecting the land against deforestation on the basis of the failure of the state of Argentina and arguing that the state failed to protect their right to a healthy environment. They were among the first also to attempt to hold the government accountable for the impact of climate change. Although indigenous people were initially unsuccessful to hold government accountable for the harmful effect of global warming, linking environment and human rights protection has recently become a powerful instrument in the fight against climate change. The Urgenda judgment of 2019, as shown in this picture, it was the first case in the world to establish that there was a legal duty on the government to prevent climate change on the basis of human rights. More recently, in the Shell case, linking human rights to combat climate change was again a successful strategy to hold companies, this time, responsible for their fair share of CO2 emission. In this case, a Dutch court marked another milestone in the history of climate litigation by requesting Royal Dutch Shell to reduce its CO2 emission on the ground that the company is violating human rights by contributing to global warming. The ruling is particularly significant because until now it has been proven very difficult to hold the company accountable and hold them accountable for their responsibility towards climate change. So therefore, using human rights law is becoming a powerful instrument in litigating against state and corporate actors for their failure to take adequate action to protect the environment. Despite this success, what must be underlined is that there are many obstacles that often prevent environmental defenders to succeed in court. National and regional courts are, as well as human rights treaty bodies, are not well equipped to address and monitor issues raised by the right to a healthy environment. In this regard, it is argued that the recognition of a right to a healthy environment provides a means to overcome classical hurdles in human rights-based environment litigation, including the standard of proof, causality, and attribution of responsibility. In summary, the legal recognition of the right to a healthy environment will further strengthen procedural and substantive obligation towards the protection of the environment. It will help to improve support for individual group, NGOs, indigenous people and judges to support and strengthen the content implementation and enforcement of those obligations to protect the environment. At the same time, it is not sufficient to improve procedural and substantive obligations regarding the protection of the environment. In addition, we must ensure that environmental protection does not discriminate but benefit people in the most vulnerable situation. This is particularly the case in relation to the impact of mitigation measures taken to address climate change, which negatively impact human rights in some cases. For example, there is an increasing number of complaints against wind energy projects due to their negative impact on human rights, more specifically on the rights of indigenous people. Last winter, the Supreme Court of Norway decided that the Fosen wind energy project, which, by the way, is the largest wind energy project in Europe, was in violation of the rights of the Sami people. During the case, the companies and the state of Norway had argued that the green shift provided a justification for the building of this wind project. On the other hand, Sami representatives and activists have opposed the project due to its impact on reindeer herding and denunciated the project for being a case of green colonialism. In its decision, the court concluded that the right to a healthy environment was not in collision with the human rights of the Sami people to culture, and that the government should have chosen less intrusive development method in order to secure the cultural rights of the Sami people. But there are other examples which demonstrate the necessity to integrate more firmly the protection of the environment with human rights. In relation to conservation issue, we have seen how the discourse on conservation can harm local community when it neglects to consider the right to access to land, to food and water. In this respect, the African Court of Human Rights, in the Ogi case in 2017, recognized that the protection of the forest could not justify the eviction of the Ogi indigenous people from their ancestral land in Kenya. More recently, in Finland, the Supreme Court ruled in 2 cases that members of the Sami indigenous people were not legally responsible for having violated fishing regulation. In the case, the government had set limits on the right to fish to protect the sustainability and biodiversity of fish species. But these rules were found by the court to violate the right of the Sami as protected by the Finnish constitution and human rights law, in particular the ICCPR. Against this background, I hope my argument becomes clear. Protecting the environment without ensuring human rights protection, including those of indigenous people, leads to further discriminate individual and group, as well as reinforce pattern of colonial domination. Adopting a human right to a healthy environment is a way to address this issue. By further integrating human rights with environmental protection and by putting human rights at the center of the green transition, we can then achieve ecological and just transformation. By way of concluding this short presentation, let me stress once more that the recognition of the human right to a healthy environment at the international level has an added value. Although the recognition of such a right is by no means a solution to the global crisis, its instrumentality to solve this crisis cannot be neglected and should be promoted. From a legal perspective, recognizing the protection of the environment as a new international human right would provide the foundation for the development of a stronger body of law to protect the environment. If recognized by the General Assembly, this right may well be a catalyst for changes because it could improve environmental law and their implementation at the national, regional, and global level. More radically, and depending upon the articulation of the right to a healthy environment has the potential to strengthen the governance of the environment for the benefit of all, including indigenous people. In other words, and here I will conclude, consecrating the right to a healthy environment could therefore lead to ecological and just transformation. I thank you all for listening to me, and I also thank you for all what you are doing to protect the planet and human rights in your work, because I'm well aware that in this room we have a number of strong activists. Thank you.